Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the On Centerline podcast. I am your host, Sam Terrell, the Northwest Aeronaut on YouTube, and really appreciate you guys joining me today. Today, we're going to be diving into some more instrument material. Something that's been requested a lot of me lately is to talk about instrument holds. And while I have done at least one video on holds in the past, it has been quite a while. It's a little bit outdated as far as the quality of video I like to put out. And even though the information is still perfectly valid. So I thought we'd do an update today and really kind of get into not just the nitty gritty of holds, but talking real talk, okay? Talking truthfully, the truth about instrument holds. Hopefully, by the end of this video, you'll see they're really not as complicated as they are sometimes made out to be. That's not to say that you should not know how to fly them properly. So we're going to be discussing all of the above today. Hey, before we get into it, I'd appreciate it if you are on YouTube, hitting that like button, hitting that subscribe button so you don't miss my future content. And if you are on one of my podcasts, providers, please follow the show. It really helps us out and helps us grow. So, all right. Today, guys, we're going to start by talking about the technical side of holds. I'm just going to do a quick recap. I was debating whether to actually make this a podcast or just make it a regular YouTube video because there will be some graphics that I will supply on screen here to help support the information I'm talking about. So if you're listening to this on a podcast, I encourage you to check out the video version on YouTube, Northwest Aeronaut on YouTube, to see some of those graphics. But I'm going to do my very best to describe everything as in detail as possible verbally so that hopefully you at least get the picture in your minds, okay? All right. So first, holds. Let's talk about why do we have holds? What's their purpose? And why do we have to make the entry to these holds so seemingly difficult? All right. First of all, holds are used to keep traffic away from each other, right? There are times in the IFR system because we can't have multiple airplanes in the same place at once, or sometimes it could just be that there's weather delays at certain airports or something along those lines where you're not able to just initiate the approach to the airport. You got to wait out a thunderstorm or whatever the case may be. And so we have these holding patterns that we put aircraft in to either just allow you as the pilot time to do what you need to do in a given moment. Okay, maybe it's preparing for the next approach or whatever it is. Maybe it's waiting out weather. Maybe you're just number 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 in line for a given approach. And ATC needs to basically just keep you in one spot while everyone else gets in first. So that's why we have holds to begin with. It's kind of like, if we were driving along, well, if we needed to just stop and pull the car over on the side of the road, we could do that. Unfortunately, in aviation, we're unable to just pull the airplane over. So in order to essentially stop in one place, we just got to fly in circles. So why do we have 3 different types of entries? And why are they seemingly so difficult? And why does anybody care? Well, actually, you might have been told by your CFII or just other pilots that actually the FAA doesn't care how you enter a hold, right? They don't care if you do squiggly lines or figure eights, or they don't care what you do as long as you stay in the area you're supposed to be in, right? The protected side of the hold. So why is it that you are tested on this on your instrument check ride? And why is it that you can fail if you potentially do the incorrect entry? So the reason why we have these entries is because, as with everything in instrument flying, we're concerned about disorientation. Okay, we're concerned about getting disoriented. We never want to have to maneuver the aircraft in such a way to where it is going to be at all aggressive or with steep bank angles or anything like that, right? We're not doing aerobatics. We're trying to maintain a standard rate of turn with minimal aircraft and certainly head movement, right? So we want to be able to enter these holding procedures in as a standard of way as possible without aggressively maneuvering the aircraft, okay? So each of these holding pattern entries are designed in a way to where you can enter that hold and stay on the protected side of that hold with as little, or as I should say, maybe as shallow of bank angles, with as smooth of maneuvering as possible, okay? We don't want to be maneuvering aggressively. We don't want to be overshooting our waypoints in our course to where we're drifting through wind onto the unprotected side of a hold, okay? So they design these entries to make the entry to the hold as simple as possible while keeping you in a standard rate turn and keeping you on the protected side of the hold. I hope that makes sense so far, okay? So that's why we have these entries, because depending on how you're approaching a holding fix, it might not be feasible or safe to do a certain type of entry without aggressively maneuvering the aircraft, which could lead to disorientation or putting you off course. And so that's what we're trying to avoid, okay? So our three different hold pattern entries are the direct entry, the teardrop entry, and the parallel entry, okay? And all they come down to is, how are you approaching the holding pattern that you have been assigned, okay? What direction are you coming from? How are you approaching that holding fix, okay? And the way we divide this up is we kind of divide it up into a pizza slice with three uneven slices. The largest slice actually takes up half the pizza, okay? It's 180 degrees out of the 360 degrees of a circle. And that is our direct entry, okay? We're going to show this here in a minute. The other slice is not quite 180 because we have to split them up into two, and they're not even. So what we do is, from that 180 degree slice that we've made, we're going to draw another line that essentially splits the other half of that pizza into a 70 degree section and a 110 degree section, okay? Of course, 110 plus 70 equals 180, which gives you the other half of the pizza. So when we are entering from the 110 degree section, that's going to be your parallel entry. When we are entering from the 70 degree section, that's your teardrop. All right, now, before we get into the nitty gritty of these, let's just talk about the easiest versus the most complicated, I'll say. None of these are particularly hard to do, but there are certain entries that are more complicated than others. Now, the easiest by far is the direct entry, okay? The direct entry, if we have our choice, or anytime we're able to do a direct entry, that's always going to be the simplest and most straightforward. The next entry I consider to be the simplest is the teardrop entry, and the teardrop is kind of almost, in many cases, just a modified direct entry, okay? So that's why it's kind of the second most simple. And then finally, we have the parallel entry, and the parallel entry is by far the most complicated entry. As I always tell my students, if you ever have the choice between a parallel entry and any other type of entry, choose another type of entry, because a direct or teardrop is always going to be simpler for you, okay? All right, so we have a lot of technology in our favor these days, moving maps, GPS, all these things that makes entering holds and flying holds really quite easy. Back in the day, before all that technology, it was a little bit more complicated. It required more thinking on the pilot's part, okay? And you should still understand and know how to fly these holds without the use of a moving map. That's kind of what my first video on holds was all about, and you can see the link for that up here, or maybe it's up here, this side, okay? I'll link it there. But I'm just going to do a quick overview of the techniques, or what we really should be looking to do in order to do these hold entries without the use of moving maps, all right? So I'm going to put, I'll put a couple cliff notes up on the screen here, but I'm going to read through these so that those of you listening on the podcast know what I'm talking about. Let's talk about our direct entry. Basically, if we're not using a moving map, or even if we are using a moving map, we need to understand that for any given entry, there's going to be something we have to do, a certain turn we have to make upon reaching the holding fix. Now, that's the first thing to understand, is that for any of these entries, and this is something that it tends to get instrument students caught up and confused, but you need to understand that for any of these entries, it is predicated on the fact that you must cross the holding fix prior to entering the hold. Okay, that's what all of these entries are predicated on. You must cross that holding fix prior to entering the hold. So let's talk about our direct entry. Direct entry is very easy. For any of these entries, you need to know at least one piece of information, if not two, but the primary piece of information you kind of want to know is, what is my outbound course? Okay, not your inbound course necessarily, although that's good to know as well. But you really want to have your outbound course in mind, okay? And I'm going to be talking about courses today. I'm not going to be referring to them as headings. Headings, of course, are important, but you have to correct for wind drift with headings, and we can get into how we accommodate or account for wind later. That's a whole different, it's a whole technique when it comes to flying holds with wind correction. And it's not something I'm going to get into today, but I'm just going to be talking about courses today, okay? So assume you're flying a heading that's going to allow you to fly the proper course with everything we're talking about. So our direct entry is quite simple. We are going to arrive at our holding fix. We're going to cross it, and then we are simply going to turn in the direction of the hold. Remember, the standard direction for holds is to the right. Right turns is our standard direction for holds, okay? You could be issued a hold to the left. That would be considered non-standard. So, assuming we have a standard hold with turns to the right, we are going to turn to the right upon reaching our holding fix, straight to our outbound course, whatever that is, okay? And then you'd fly the outbound leg for the appropriate either amount of time, or these days, if you're flying an RNAV hold, RNAV holds are done in distance, usually 4 miles, sometimes 5, okay? So you're either going to fly outbound for the appropriate amount of time or distance before turning inbound, okay? And we're not going to get into the nitty-gritties of, again, trying to figure out, remember, when we're talking about time, whether a minute or a minute and a half, depending on your altitude, that's what we are referring to the inbound leg for. The inbound leg should be 1 minute. And so it takes a little bit of math and a little bit of figuring things out with wind to know when to turn inbound to get that 1 minute inbound leg. But that's outside of the scope of this video today. All right, so direct entry, we cross our waypoint, we turn in the direction of the hold to the outbound course. Very easy, okay? Now, parallel entry. This one, actually, you know what? I'm going to talk about teardrop first. Teardrop entry. Again, this is the next easiest one. We are going to essentially cross the holding fix, and then we are going to fly in the direction of the protected side of the hold, roughly 30 degrees off of our outbound course, okay? Now, this might sound confusing. I'm going to do some graphics here later and hopefully make it a little bit simpler. But basically, let's just say our outbound course is 360. If we're doing a standard hold with right turns, flying in the direction of the protected side of the hold, but 30 degrees off of our outbound course, is going to involve us subtracting 30 degrees from our outbound course. So 360 minus 30 would be 330, okay? So basically, we would fly a course of 330. That would keep us on the protected side of our hold. And then, after we fly the appropriate time or distance on that entry leg, we would turn in the same direction as our hold. So in that case, right, we would turn right to intercept our inbound course. okay, which would be 180 at that point. Okay, outbound is 360, which means inbound is 180. All right. Now, if it was left turns, flying to the protected side of the hold would involve adding 30 degrees. Okay, and again, it's roughly 30 degrees, give or take, and depending on if you're doing a timed hold or a distance hold, it might vary slightly. But if we're going to add 30 degrees to 360, that means we would turn right to a heading of 030. Okay, we're going to fly 030 before making a left turn to intercept our inbound course. Okay, this is again kind of just a modified direct entry, and depending on the exact direction that you are entering the hold from, the direct entry and the teardrop could almost seem almost identical. Okay, there's a small window of headings in which you enter, you arrive at your holding fix, in which a teardrop and a direct entry are pretty much the same thing. Okay, so easy enough there. Now, parallel. Again, none of these entries are particularly hard, but a parallel entry is by far the most complicated. So, for a parallel entry, we're going to arrive at our holding fix. Then we are going to turn to our outbound course in whichever direction is shortest. In other words, if it's only 30 degrees to the right to turn to our outbound course, then we're going to turn to the right to our outbound course. We're not going to turn 330 degrees to the left, right? That's pretty straightforward. So whatever direction's shortest to get to that parallel, that outbound course, that's the direction we're going to turn to that outbound course. Now, this is going to take us parallel to our outbound course, or our inbound course even, in this case. So we're going to fly outbound for the appropriate time or distance. Then we are going to make a turn in the opposite direction of the direction of the hold. So in other words, if this is a right turn hold, it's a standard direction hold, we're going to be making a left turn all the way around to intercept our inbound course. If it was a left turn hold, we'd make a right turn. Okay, so the opposite direction of the hold direction is where we're going to turn to intercept our inbound course. Now, the key here is that we want to make sure we turn around at a rate and within a radius that's going to allow us to ideally intercept that inbound course prior to passing the holding fix. Because if you make the turn too shallow, or if you make the intercept angle too shallow back to your inbound course, you could easily pass the holding fix before intercepting the course. Okay, and that's what we want to avoid. So when we make this turn, we've flown outbound on the parallel leg. Now we're going to turn around to intercept the inbound. We are going to do a 260 degree turn, roughly. Okay, sometimes you don't need to go all the way to 260 degrees. It just kind of depends on winds and things like that. Now, how do you identify what 260 degrees is? Well, if we're going to be doing a standard turn with right turns, or a standard hold with right turns, that means we're going to be turning left to intercept this inbound course. So we're going to look at the 4 o'clock position on our heading indicator. If we were in a left turn hold and we would be making a right turn in this case, we would be looking at the 8 o'clock position. So 4 o'clock or 8 o'clock, those are going to show you what roughly 260 degrees is. Okay, so we're in a standard hold, which means we're going to be making a left turn here to come around and intercept our inbound course. We're going to look at our 4 o'clock position, whatever that heading is. Okay, if we're on a outbound course of 360, that 4 o'clock position might be roughly 130, 140, 150, right? About 150, let's say. So we're going to start that left turn around towards 150, standard rate. And that should put us on a good intercept angle to get that inbound course intercepted. And we would then turn 80 degrees back to the right to intercept that inbound course. So we're doing a 260 degree turn followed by an 80 degree turn. to intercept the inbound course. Again, that's what makes it complicated, not hard, just complicated. And again, you don't necessarily need to go all the way to 260 degrees if you see that inbound course coming in pretty rapidly, right? The whole goal is to intercept the inbound course. So whatever it takes to get you to do that, that's what you're going to do. And you'll start rolling out of that turn to intercept the course at the appropriate time regardless, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. I know it's a lot, especially if you're just listening to this, but we're going to get into what these holds actually look like now. So let's get some examples. Now, in my other video where I talk about these hold entries, and you might have seen in other people's videos, the thumb method. The thumb method is simply an easy way to kind of visualize the lines on our heading indicator that we need to kind of decipher which hold entry is going to be the most effective, okay? And I'll show that on the screen here. There's a great app. If you go on your iPad and go to the App Store, it's called Hold Trainer by Pilots Cafe. Okay, Pilots Cafe Holding Trainer. It's a great little app to practice and get a grasp on the types of hold entries that you're going to need to be proficient with. So that's what we're going to use here. All right. So what this app does is gives you simulated clearances, simulated hold clearances, and then allows you to choose what type of entry you would use for that hold clearance. Now, in order to determine the type of entry you're going to use, you must basically know which course or heading you are going to be arriving to the holding fix on. If you are basically not going direct to the holding fix, you're not really going to be able to know what entry is appropriate. So we have to get to a point where we're essentially heading direct to the holding fix first. Then we can figure out what type of entry we're going to use. In this case, on the app, it shows you the current heading on the DG, on the simulated DG here, that you are arriving to the fix at, and then you're going to figure out the entry to the hold from there. There are two different types of ways that ATC could give you a clearance for a hold. They're either going to give you it in the form of a bearing. In this case, it says hold north on the 159er bearing. And remember, a bearing is something we follow to a station. So in other words, we are flying 159 to the station. If they were to say 159er radial, that would be away from the station. A radial is always your outbound course. Okay, so I mentioned earlier how we need to know our outbound course. If they give you a radial, that's your outbound course. So it makes it very easy. If they give you a bearing, that's going to be your inbound course. So in order to know your outbound course, you just need to take the inverse, the opposite of whatever the bearing they give you is. Now, here's something to keep in mind. First of all, it is exceedingly rare, especially in this day and age, to ever receive a non-published hold clearance, an unpublished hold. Okay? I'm not saying it won't happen, and depending on the part of the world you're in, it might be more prevalent than in other parts. But in general, it is exceedingly rare for you to ever be issued an unpublished hold. There is typically always going to be a published hold somewhere. It might be a published hold that is published on an approach plate. It could be a published hold on an arrival or departure, or something like that, but it's going to be published somewhere. And generally, when ATC issues holds, they're going to be issuing holds that are published somewhere, okay? So with that said, the bearing or radial that you're going to be holding at is going to be given to you wherever it's published, okay? And it's not uncommon for you to hear hold at this waypoint as published, okay? That's what ATC would say. But if you were to be issued an unpublished hold, you need to be paying attention to whether they say bearing or radial. And if you have any question about it, ask for clarification, because holding north on the 159 bearing, okay, is a lot different than holding north on the 159 radial. Remember, 159 is roughly, let's just call it 160. 160 is more or less south, right? South, southeast. So if it's 160 radial, that means 160 is going to be our outbound course. We're going to be flying outbound 160 and inbound towards the station or waypoint on a bearing of 340. That means that the actual hold would be occurring to the southeast of that station, or to the south. We'll just call it to the south of that station or that waypoint. Okay, we'd be going out from the waypoint, 160. We'd be coming back in on 340, and we would stay south of that waypoint or station. With the 160 bearing, it means we're going to the station at 160 and away from it at 340, which is going to keep us north of that station or waypoint. So it makes sense here, what we see on the screen, where it says hold north on the 159 bearing, okay, because we can put that in our heads and say, okay, we're going to be going to the station at 159er, which means we'll be going away from it at 339er, which was going to keep us north. Okay, it makes sense. And that's why they tell you that. Okay, when they give you a direction, hold north of, it should match up with the bearing and radials and inbound and outbound courses that you're flying on that hold. Okay, if there's any discrepancy there, if they were to say hold south of the XYZ waypoint on the 160 radial, if they said hold south of the 160 bearing, that wouldn't make sense, because in order for you to fly towards the station at 160 and then fly away from it at 340, that would make you north. It doesn't make sense to fly 160 bearing south of the station. It's impossible. Okay? So you need to make sure these things line up and make sense. So hold north on the 159er bearing to the Charlie, Quebec, November, NDB. Make left turns. That's what this says. Okay, this is the simulated clearance that we have in the app here. So what are we going to do? First of all, this is left turns. It's a non-standard hold. Okay, if they were not to make any mention, they're never going to say make right turns, generally. They'll just say hold north on the 159er bearing, and that's it. If they make no mention of direction, it's always going to be right turns. Okay, but if they do need you to make a non-standard turn, then they'll say make left turns. All right, so using the thumb method, and we're just going to do this real quick. We're going to put our thumb down, and we got to use our left thumb in this case because this is a left turning hold. If it was a standard hold, we'd be using our right thumb. All we're going to do is stick our thumbs, the appropriate thumb, on either the 9 o'clock position with our left thumb of our heading indicator, or the 3 o'clock position with our right thumb. All this does is the width of your thumb tends to take up about 40 total degrees on the heading indicator, which means there's 20 on top, 20 below. And that allows you to basically draw our lines, which you can see here. And that shows you kind of the 3 different pieces of the pizza, because we're going to draw the line from the top of our thumb straight down to the other side of the heading indicator. And then the other line is always going to go from U, which is represented here as the little airplane, from the very center of your heading indicator straight to the top, 12 o'clock position. That is always going to be the case no matter what. So the thumb method just allows you to kind of visualize how the other line intersects the heading indicator to create your 3 pieces of pizza. All right. Okay, so left turns, we're going to put our thumb down, our left thumb, and we can see, in this case, we have been assigned a bearing. Now, I mentioned earlier how we really want to know our outbound course. Well, 159er in this case is not our outbound course. It is our inbound course. In order to properly figure out the hold entry, we need to know our outbound course. So we're going to take the inverse, the opposite of that bearing, which is 339, and we're going to see which slice of the pizza it falls in. So we could put our left thumb down to draw our line. We see that 339 falls roughly at the 7 o'clock position on our attitude or on our heading indicator, which is right smack dab in the middle of our direct entry slice of pizza. Okay, so that gives us our direct entry there. The little slice, the littlest slice again, would be our teardrop, and the second big slice would be our parallel entry. Let's keep going here to our next one. Okay, this next one says hold south over the Romeo Delta Uniform VOR on the 170 radial. So a couple things to note. First of all, they did not tell us any direction to turn. What does that mean? It means we are naturally going to do right turns. Okay, so this is a standard hold. The other thing to note is that they gave us a radial this time, not a bearing. That means that 170 is going to be our outbound course. So let's think to ourselves, 170 is roughly south, right? Just 10 degrees off true south of 180. So if we're going away from the station at 170 and then back to it on 350, will that keep us on the south side of the station as they told us? Yeah, it will. Okay. Now, if we were thinking to ourselves, wait, they said hold south over the VOR on the 170 bearing. Well, that doesn't make sense because that would keep us to the north. So something's wrong here. I need to clarify. Did they mean hold north on the 170 bearing? Or did they mean hold south on the 350 bearing, or, which one? Because it could go either way, right? So we need to clarify. And I bring this up, guys, because I've heard in real time over the radio when I'm flying, I've heard people get issued clearances for holds, and neither controller nor pilot realized the mistake. The controller issued a hold with a bearing that would not have equaled the side of the hold that they should be on. And the pilot just read it back and everyone was happy with it, even though it didn't make sense. Okay, I've heard it. So we need to make sure that the clearance we receive makes sense and you know exactly which side and all the directions of turns and everything that you're doing, okay? All right, so hold south over the RDU VOR on the 170 radial. This is right turns. We're going to use our right thumb over the 3 o'clock position of our heading indicator. We draw our lines, and we see that 170 falls just barely in our parallel slice of pizza. Okay, so we hit parallel, and we see that parallel is, in fact, the correct answer. And from there, we can see the lines, and we can also, what's nice about this app, we can click on the plan view. This shows you exactly what it would actually look like if you were actually flying it from kind of a top-down view. You can even switch your orientation from north up to track up so that we can see how it would look from our vantage point. Okay, so again, this Holding Trainer by Pilots Cafe is a great app to get used to this type of stuff. Okay, so I know that's a lot, and especially over a podcast, I know it can be hard to understand, but hopefully you can check out the YouTube video if you are listening to this on one of the podcast providers, and it'll help make more sense. Well, we're going to now just look at more of the practical kind of, again, with all the technology we have these days, it's a lot simpler with the moving maps and all the pretty pictures we have to know how to enter a hold properly. So we're just going to kind of look at that. But I do, again, encourage you to understand the steps required to do any type of hold entry without the use of a moving map. Okay, everything we just spoke about. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, like I mentioned, most all holds you're ever going to fly or get issued are going to be published. It will be on a picture somewhere on an approach plate, most typically, okay? Most approach plates have two holds. They have either a hold in lieu of procedure turn, right? In which if you're doing the full procedure, you're going to use that as a procedure turn. And they have the hold for the missed approach procedure. Sometimes even two, because they might have two sets of missed approach procedures. So we're going to pull up an approach plate. Give me a second here. All right, guys, I pulled up one of my favorite example approaches just because it's one that we use a lot here. This is the ILS or localizer runway 22 at McMinnville. All right, so we have two different holds on this approach plate. We have the one at Osier, which is our initial approach fix. And if you were doing the full procedure of this approach, you would go to Osier and you would do that hold in lieu of procedure turn. Okay. At the very least, you'd use it for the purpose of a procedure turn. And again, depending on how busy it is, ATC could just have you hold at Osier to wait your turn in line to get into the airport. And then finally, we have our hold at Lucy for our missed approach. Okay. Now, let's just take a look and pretend that we are departing my airport, my home airport of 7 Sierra Tree, which is roughly here. I'll just mark it with an X, roughly. So our typical way that we would do this if we were departing Twin Oaks to do this approach is we go to the Newburgh VOR, and then we would go straight to Osier, which just happens to be on the 111 radial off of Newburgh. So assuming we are approaching Osier from Newburgh on this 111 radial, we are flying 111. We're just going to call it 110 to keep things a little bit simple. We're flying 110 and approaching Osier essentially from the northwest, okay? So this is a standard hold with right turns. How are we going to enter this hold to allow us to do it most easily at a standard rate of turn and keep us on the protected side of the hold? So this is always going to be kind of the path of least resistance, okay? We don't want to make any steep turns. We don't want to make any tight turns. It's just going to be kind of whatever flows the easiest. Keeping in mind, once again, we have to cross the holding fix before entering the hold, okay? So from the direction we're coming from, right here, towards Osier, in order, let's just look, if we were going to do a direct entry, would it make sense? Well, we're going to hit the point here and we'd have to turn all the way around to the right. That's going to be very steep, very awkward, and take us well into the localizer course. It's just not going to make sense, right? Let's take a look at our teardrop entry. If we did that, we would have to turn from Osier all the way to the left to go this way before coming around this direction. Well, that's like minimum a 90-degree turn. Minimum. It's probably a little bit more than 90 degrees of turn. Doesn't make sense, okay? So what makes the most sense? Parallel entry in this case. Unfortunately, we don't really have another option. Like I said, if you ever have the option between parallel and something else, choose something else. We don't really have that option here. So parallel entry, it's only going to be a nice, easy, less than 90 degrees of turn, okay? So we're going to turn to our outbound course of 038 this way, fly out for 1 minute. Then we're going to do our 260-degree turn followed by our 80-degree turn to re-intercept. It's going to look like this. We come around 260 right there and then intercept here to go inbound, okay? So that's our parallel entry. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at Lucy. This is our missed approach. So our missed approach, we're going to follow our missed approach line here. And our missed approach procedure says to climb straight ahead to 900, make a climbing right turn to 3000 to intercept the 204 radial off the Newburgh VOR, okay? Now it says make a right climbing turn to 3000 on a heading of 069. This is something to consider, guys, because look it. You see it depicted here, turning to 069 on the chart to intercept the 204 radial or 024 bearing, and it looks fine. Looks easy enough. What most people fail to remember or understand is that what you see here on this plate is designed and created for jets, fast, large aircraft with a much wider turning radius than you in your little 172 or Piper Cherokee. If you, in your 172, tried to turn to 069 on this missed approach, you'd get to about here. You'd make that right turn to 069 and you'd be going off this way. You would never ever intercept that radial. And then at best, you'd have to call ATC, or ATC would probably come on and say, what are you doing? You should be following the proper missed approach procedure. And then they'd have to give you an alternate procedure. But it wouldn't be a good thing. Okay. And at worst, it could put you in a dangerous situation. So you need to remember that. When it's steep turns like this on a missed approach procedure, it's designed for jets. So the headings that they give you are not necessarily ones that are going to work for you in your aircraft. In this case, for us, it would actually make more sense to fly more of a 360 heading, okay, 360 to intercept the 204 radial, okay? So the bottom line is you need to intercept the proper radial to get to the missed approach fix, the missed approach point fix there, not just blindly follow headings that aren't going to get you on a proper intercept angle. All right, that's a little bit of a side note, but something that happens all too often. But looking at our missed approach hold here, we are going to intercept that 204 radial. And as you see, it takes us straight to Lucy very easily. You can see that all we have to do, we're basically already on the inbound leg for this hold. So what do we have to do? We just have to hit the fix. This is a direct entry. It's as direct as they come, folks. Okay, we hit Lucy and we just turn to our outbound course and we start flying the hold just like that. Very easy, okay? So anytime we're looking at these holds, whether missed approach holds or holds in lieu of procedure turn, it's easy, and this is something great you can practice, to just sit down with your iPad, Apple Pencil, whatever, and kind of draw. If I'm coming from this direction to this hold, how would I enter? Let's just look at Lucy again here. Let's say we were coming from this direction. Let me move this over here. Let's say we're coming from this direction at Lucy, okay? Which we never really would be necessarily, but let's just say we were. We would hit Lucy. How are we going to fly that hold? Well, we're basically just going to continue on this heading to do a teardrop entry straight across, then make that right turn into the hold this way, okay? So that would be a way where we would do a teardrop entry. And then let's just say we were coming from this direction to Lucy. Well, we'd hit Lucy. How are we going to make that turn in order to stay on the protected side? Well, we're going to just turn a little bit to the left, fly outbound here before making our parallel entry this way, okay, and into the hold. So, great exercise to do. Just sit down with some approach plates or whatever. If you have your Apple Pencil, great. And just pick different areas. Hey, I'm coming from this direction. I'm coming from this direction. How would I do that? What type of entry would I use? With a little bit of practice, guys, it becomes very easy to kind of just look at a missed approach procedure or a hold in lieu of procedure turn and say, okay, we're coming from this direction. It's going to be a teardrop entry, easy peasy, whatever. All right. And it goes a long way just to chair fly that at home. All right. So in summary, guys, the truth about holds. Does ATC care how you enter a hold? No, they do not. Okay. But the reason why we have these entries is to make it as easy as possible for you to get established in a given hold procedure while keeping you on the protected side of that hold and allowing you to make more or less standard rate turns. That's why we have these different entries. If you are on the line between one entry and another, you can choose whatever you want, whatever is easiest for you. Like I said, if it's a choice between parallel and anything else, choose something else. If it's a choice between direct and teardrop, it's up to you. They're both practically as easy. Whatever makes the most sense. One thing to consider is your GPS, if you're using GPS for navigation, might plan on having you do a certain hold entry at a certain waypoint based on what it's calculated. That may or may not be the way you would choose or have in your head as to how you're going to enter that hold. So you always need to make sure that you and your GPS, especially if you're using autopilot, you need to make sure that you and your GPS are on the same page as far as how you're flying that hold entry, because if you have this entry in your head, entry A in your head, and GPS autopilot decides to fly entry B, you could look at that in the moment and not understand what it's doing and think that it's doing something wrong when it's not, okay? So we always want to be on the same page with our navigation equipment and be thinking ahead to these. I hope this video and this podcast have been helpful to you guys. I know, again, a lot of graphics that we couldn't see on the podcast. Hopefully my auditory skills, my narration was able to paint a picture for you. But again, I encourage any of you listening to the podcast to go onto the YouTube channel, Northwest Aeronaut, and find this video podcast so you can see the graphics that will hopefully help you out. Check out the Pilot's Cafe holding trainer. It goes a long way to help you. And then just sit down and chair fly those different entries on approach plates. These should be very easy for you guys. I really appreciate you spending time with me today. Share this video with anyone else you think would find it helpful. And we will see you next time on Centerline.